a moment, but before we do that, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about kind of what this masterclass is about, why we're talking about this. So the ever-increasing pace of change in today's organizations really requires executives to understand and quickly respond to constant shifts in how the business operates and how work must get done. And this means resisting to the innate biases against doing new things in new ways and continuously scanning for growth opportunities and acquire essentially drastically different capabilities for yourself and your organization. And to succeed, you really must be willing to reinvent how your organization moves from periodic training to an organization that is willing to be a continuous learning organization. So let us tell you a little bit about who we are real quick for those that are just getting to know us. So my name is Elena Agaragimova. I'm along with Ivan, we're co-founders of Bestern. And I actually come from background of higher education and learning. For me, I've spent a lot of my career in working in different institutions and organizations in the US as well as the Middle East. I've been in Dubai for 7 years, 8 years, actually it's coming up 8 years. Yeah, it was, for me, it was a passion that turned into a career and then a business. I live and breathe personal and professional development. I love delivering these sort of topics. I can't wait till we're face-to-face again because I'm starting to get zoomed, I don't know, zoomed out, whatever you want to call it, but I need a live audience. I cannot wait to get back in sort of face-to-face setting with corporations, delivering different sessions and really helping them transform. So looking forward to this, to being here with you guys. Ivan?
Okay, for the ones who don't know me, so I'm a person who is passionate about science. Elena suffers out of that quite often because I really talk a lot about science. I'm an engineer, but I have worked most of the time in the corporate world in corporate strategy. And similar to some of you, I guess that I have been breathing and living the challenges of helping organizations transform. In my particular case, I was working in an organization where I was helping transform 60,000 people around the world. It was a global company. And also I had this challenge of not having the perfect answer about what if I had like a kind of a magic wand where most people actually use the investment in their development and we can predict the business outcome. Not just if they are satisfied about learning or not just if they actually put it in practice. So, and this led in fact to this, to my interest in neuroscience. And neuroscience is about understanding how the brain processes decision and changes in our life. And you will see that the discussion that we're going to have, more than talking about the corporations, we're going to talk about the human being, about the individual. So you will relate to a lot of the discussions that we are going to be handling during this masterclass. So I got interested in neuroscience, and this is one of the reasons why Elena and I joined forces with her background in terms of corporate learning, a little bit of my nerdish, edgy side. We combined forces in order to found Bestern. So we work a lot in terms of helping organizations using this type of behavioral science and innovative learning methodologies to help the organizations thrive. First of all, it has a lot to do with the mental capacity of people feeling well with themselves, feeling fulfilled, feeling self-actualized. We talk a lot about the topic, right, Elena? So we have been published in different tier 1 media, like Entrepreneur Magazine, Thrive Global. Lately, we were showcased in the national, and we have been collaborating with EdTech corporation, EdTech accelerators, such as Plug and Play, Supercharger Ventures, who have been helping us, in fact, to go faster in terms of the type of learning approach that we want to implement in organizations and make them successful. So that's a little bit about our story. We are Bestern. By the way, for people who ask me quite often, Bestern means to improve, and it's a German word, and I didn't mention it. I grew up, my nationality is, I am Swiss, so I was living in the French side, but obviously 70% of Switzerland is German speaking, so we chose German word that is quite meaningful for us.
All right, so let's dive into kind of what we're going to be specifically talking today about. So, and as I'm kind of going through these questions that we're going to be answering, I'm also curious to hear from you guys, you know, what is the most relevant question that you're sort of struggling with right now in your organization when it comes to developing your talent or maybe looking at transformation of your organization. So we're going to look at kind of why corporations are struggling to make learning stick. Right. So that's a big challenge for many of us. What is really learning and traditional methods? Why is it that it doesn't always work? This kind of cookie cutter approach to traditional trainings, you know, classroom trainings as we see it today, where people go in 6 to 8 hours in one go and they train. Or the e-learnings, for example, right? Like, why is it that, you know, people are just not driven to be a self-learner and to go on their own? What is, you know, how do we actually learn how to learn? Like, how can we create a practice of day-to-day to helping ourselves and our team members learn how to learn? What does the brain have to do with all this? There's a lot of research in neuroscience about how we learn according to how our brain processes information. And finally, how do you actually establish actions to create a learning organization that fits the profile of your company? So I'm just curious to hear from you guys if you want to just use the chat to let us know which of these challenges or these biggest questions you relate to the most. Maybe all of them, maybe some of them, maybe there's something else. We're just curious to hear from you. So we'll give you a minute. Pramila said all of them. Yes.
That happens.
Who else? What about the rest of you? What are the biggest challenges your organization is managing at the moment in this times of change? I feel like we've been saying it for 2 years, times of change, but it's always changing. It's a good thing. Things are changing. Change is good.
So in fact, the change itself is not going to be that new in 2022. Finally, we have been changing so much.
Yeah. Pramila also said identifying skills to help us achieve business outcomes. Laura said agree, all of them as well. What else? Anybody else? Giving you a few seconds. Anna said corporations are sticking to the same learning approach, managing it internally rather than sometimes looking for expert solutions. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. But sometimes we have to understand that the challenge is when I relate back to my times when I was in corporate strategy and we were doing programs in order to accelerate that the transformation goes together with the change of behaviors of people, it was quite difficult to find out the right answers because every provider will tell you what they already know. And the sad reality about learning and development is that for the last 20 years, methodology has been same.
Emily, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that name correctly, but importance of blended learning, finding the right level of energy, making sure we're not overwhelming the people and finding the right time. Absolutely. Fernanda said identifying which skills to zone in on. Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, all great points. All right, wonderful. So we're all here for a good reason, and that's some of the things we're going to be discussing. So let's go ahead and dive into it.
So before we move on, let's frame a little bit the extent of the problem. It became how people learn became really the hot topic when COVID started. And one of the reasons was this specific study that was done by KPMG towards the end of 2020, where they were comparing, in fact, what are the areas that CEOs see as the most risky in their organization. So before COVID, the talent development was number 11 in terms of risk for the future of the organization. During COVID, what happened is magically that became number 1. And this is the realization, in fact, that something was not working perfectly in the wonderful world of learning and development, because we were not ready for the changes that happened during COVID. Many organizations had to disrupt quickly to change their business model from retail face-to-face to completely online. You needed to develop new product, new services that were more adapted to the situation. People got overstressed. The level of stress in the Middle East, for instance, came from around 40% of people that were on stress to 65, which is quite a lot. And obviously, our mental capacity has an influence on how we absorb behaviors. We live in fear, and when we live in fear, we don't take the risks that are necessary in order to change. And what happens in reality, if we take this picture of what people want, there was a lot of changes that were implemented. Suddenly, we saw a lot of e-learning platforms that were made available for people. Good thing. I say good thing. But I will tell you a little bit more about why it's not such a good thing in the long term. But what we haven't realized is that when we look at the employee, the individual, this person, and if we think about ourselves, I mean, if you are in HR, if you are in finance, or even if you are a simple instructor like us, Elena, the thing is that we feel overwhelmed. We spend around 28% of our time checking for emails, answering emails. 16% of employees think that we must 60% of companies have a program to simplify work. That is not so much. There is still the 84% that remaining that doesn't have a program to simplify the work because we are completely online, on demand, answering emails, Slack channels, emails, all of the time. And now with the Zoom calls, our brain has become so much overwhelmed and the big question is, how can we expect that we learn new things or we acquire new behaviors if we don't have the mental capacity and we're completely overloaded with content? Let's pause a moment and think about ourselves, how difficult it is to go through an e-learning after 5, 6 hours or 8 hours or continuous on-demand processing of our brain. If you think about it, it's not that super easy. I was saying that somehow it's super good that there was more tools available for people to learn. But what is happening is that there is a mismatch between what employees want and need and what is offered. So let me tell you a little bit more. If you think about it, there is a great number, 5 to 15% of people who are using e-learnings finish their e-learning. So you can have the best e-learning platform on the world, like LinkedIn Learning is magnificent, I love it, but only 5 to 15% of people will finish it. So what is happening is very often that they feel alone to complete it. They start with high motivation, and at the end, it's very difficult to finish what we started. And that has happened to all of us, including me. And Elena mentioned also the fact that there is long trainings, and very often these in-class trainings are without practice. So within the time frame of 2 months, only 5% of people are capable of remembering the key takeaways of a training that lasted 8 hours, which is very difficult. And the reason is mainly focused on how we process information and acquire knowledge, cognition inside of our brains. So most of the employees prefer to learn in the flow of work. What does it mean in the flow of work? That it doesn't mean interrupt my work. And if you think about it, we also do it. When we have an answer to a specific question, we go and Google it. We go to YouTube and learn within 5 minutes how to do certain things. So most of people are craving to have the accessibility to quick, short answers. People also prefer to learn at their own pace, which is a kind of a contradiction with saying, let's block this time in to learn something. Let's plan for a training in 2 months' time. So in order for people to thrive, to be able to learn better, and also, by the way, to improve the perception of the learning and development department, there's a survey done by Josh Bersin about what is the Net Promoter Scores. Net Promoter Scores, in a nutshell, is about would you recommend the job of learning and development to someone else? The Net Promoter Score is -8, which is quite bad, by the way, because it means that they don't feel supported in their efforts, specifically during COVID, in order to get better. So what people want is collaborative learning, no boundaries at any time, and feel empowered to decide when to do the things. And we will discuss a little bit more about why that happens.
Ivan, we had a question also. So you mentioned the low ratio of people completing e-learning courses. Do you know if this was for paid or free courses? Samer asked.
Okay, so I have the impression that this number is for free courses. But why am I using the number for free courses? Because employees, when they receive an access to LinkedIn Learning or Coursera or Udemy, they feel it like it's for free. So the perception is that it is same. So if you are not paying, you are not paying for it, you don't feel like any not related to finish, because it's not an effort that you have to do for yourself. It's not your own decision. It is imposed, or it is just available and you have the motivation for a short time and then you don't do it. Yes. Good question.
Fernanda mentioned she's seen both as well.
Hmm.
All right, good stuff. So moving on. So we've talked about kind of so far about the challenges that are happening, you know, what's been done before, what is currently happening. And I always like to put things in two different sides. So on one side, we have the responsibility of the organization, right? So us as kind of leaders in organizations and L&D departments and HR to say, this is the resources and tools and support we offer to our employees. But then there's also responsibility of the individual. So, and I think that's important because, you know, I often see a lot of employees saying, well, my company's not doing X, Y, and Z, and they're not offering X, Y, and Z to me. But it's not always about that. It's about the individual. So what type of individual is the one that's actually going to continuously learn? And for our job as leaders, you know, in our organizations, it's also important to lead by example. And I believe that's how, you know, learning spreads. That's how that itch to be a continuous learning organization spreads, is the more people you have with these characteristics that I'm about to describe to you, which is aspiration, self-awareness, curiosity, and vulnerability. The more of these characteristics we have in ourselves and our team members, the easier learning will take place, the easier an organization can actually reach that potential and address all the challenges that we're kind of covering today. So let's start with aspiration. So to be aspired to do something, we always think it's like, you know, you either have this aspiration or you don't. And typically, because when it's time to learn something new, what happens is it's usually, it's difficult. New things are difficult to learn. And we often go into the negative mode because new things is difficult and we're like, oh, do I really have to do this, etc., right? Or maybe you've seen your employees being in this mindset. So we kind of focus on the negative and unconsciously reinforce this lack of aspiration, this lack of willingness to want to learn. But when we actually do want to learn something, so, you know, really creating a personalized learning journeys for ourselves, when we do want to learn something, we tend to focus on the positives and kind of what we're going to gain from the learning. So we start to shift our perspective and envision this happy future. If I learn this, I'm going to be doing this. If I achieve this, I'm going to, you know, it's going to make me feel good, etc. And essentially, just when it comes to aspiration, the way you can be aspired to learn, even if it's difficult or maybe you're not necessarily bought into it yet, is by shifting your focus from looking at it as a challenge and as something difficult to looking at the benefits. And I think that's what we fail at a lot of times because it's just natural human nature to be afraid of the unknown. So maybe if we look at what are we going to gain from this learning, and if we shift to that perspective versus how difficult something may be to learn, that will make us more aspired to want to learn and do so long term. Self-awareness. Yeah, Ivan.
Elena, what you said made me think, in fact, is a little bit like if we put it into the context of going to a training about presentation skills is not that your aspiration is to go to the training for doing presentation skills, is because you want to become a more effective communicator. And that shift in the brain is an image. You don't have an image of going through the training. You have an image of the person you want to become. And it's very different than the training objectives. That's something, an aspiration is not the training objectives.
And as I'm going through this also, I want you to kind of reflect to yourself and saying, you know, which 4 of these areas that you think you can kind of work on to improve, or what are the ones that stick out the most to you? And please continue to kind of engage and ask us questions in the comments. So the next one is self-awareness. Now, we all understand self-awareness. We have this kind of, you know, idea that it's important, right, to understand, you know, who's it that we are, why we do, what really drives us. And as leaders in organizations, it's essential, not just leaders, for everybody, self-awareness is essential, right? So when it comes to actually, you know, learning, having the needs to learn something, our self-assessment of ourselves, like what we know and what we don't know, right? Like our gaps are usually unclear to us. And it's pretty inaccurate. In fact, there was a study conducted by Cornell University psychologist, and I'll just check it out for you guys. So he said that 94% of college professors reported that they were doing above average work in their teachings. And actually it found out that more than half of them were wrong, and many extremely wrong, because their self-deception diminished any appetite for development. And we see this over and over again, especially in like old school kind of, you know, leadership roles, you know, it's called maybe also relevant to fixed mindset, right? So at some point we say, well, I know what I know, and it's enough, and I've gotten this far in life, and it's going well for me, and I don't really need to learn anything new, and I'm doing great. And usually we probably see this in leadership that is not being challenged, because it's very difficult to challenge somebody in a, I don't know, in a senior position than you, right? So if leadership is not being challenged, they don't know what they don't know. So when it comes to self-awareness and the way that we learn, we have to continuously check ourselves and look at, you know, are we really doing what's the best practices of something? Are we really, you know, are we reinventing ourselves enough? What do we need to unlearn? Are we really being proactive in terms of what is going to require from us in the future? What is, you know, what does a year or 2 years from now in our roles look like? What do I need to learn realistically? Who do I need to become? Like, what is the person that I need to become to be in this new role, or in this future version of myself, right? So, and it's natural that we're not all great at evaluating ourselves. And this is why, you know, opportunities for kind of coaching and conversations really come in handy, because it's almost like somebody putting up a mirror and giving you an opportunity to reflect, essentially. So self-awareness is a big part of how and why we learn, and how often we learn as well. So the next one, of course, is curiosity. So, you know, when we're kids, we are super curious, and we're always asking questions. And we ask, I mean, the biggest questions that kids ask is why? Why is that? Why is that? Etc. Right? At some point in life, we lose it, sadly. So I want us to really reframe and how we maintain our curiosity, and continue to ask ourselves questions, and to wonder, and to ask the how. And I wonder if this can be better. I wonder what would look different if this was, or what would better look like if I could do things differently. Being curious, you know, I'm curious, if we take this approach, what would happen? What if we take this approach? It's continuously thinking of ways to do something better. Just because something has been working for X number of, I don't know, months or years, does not mean it's not time to reconsider other ways. There's always better, faster, more efficient, effective ways to do something in our lives. So, and again, these sort of, you know, these 4 points that we're talking about, it's not just in our work, it's essentially, you know, having these characteristics within yourself as an individual. So whether it's in your personal or professional lives, to have this continuous curiosity that drives us, right? It's not like a switch that we turn on when we come to work and we become curious, and then by the time we get home, we lose our curiosity. It's not like that. It's how can you embed this curious mindset? And the way you do it is by asking continuously these questions of how, and I wonder, and I'm curious to know, etc. And finally, the last piece here is the vulnerability. And what this refers to is the ability to understand that we don't know everything, we cannot possibly, and that there's always something new to learn, and that we are going to fail, and that learning new things is difficult, and oftentimes we're going to fail. And being vulnerable enough to say, I'm going to try it, I haven't tried it yet, I'm not sure how I'm going to do this, but I'm going to do my best to try this new learning, etc. So it's just being vulnerable enough to say, listen, let's try it. It may or may not fail. And if it does, I'm okay with it. And just being okay with that. And again, as we grow more senior in our lives and our careers, it becomes more and more difficult to face the fact that, like, oh, I don't really know anything, and and I need to keep trying, and that to push yourself to experiment with things. I think it's essential, and this is probably one of the biggest missing pieces for a lot of senior leaders and organizations, is that at some point we're just afraid to try new things. So being vulnerable enough to feel dumb at times. Basically, there's nothing wrong with being embarrassed and dumb, etc. No matter how many years of experience you have, we're all human at the end of the day, and that's what it's all about. So there's a couple of comments, I think. Emil was talking about aspiration, so probably easier when you're doing IDP. What is IDP? Individual development something, I assume. Then you lead what and where you need to develop. Yeah, so individual development program or planning. Okay. And Sostenis, I hope I'm saying this correctly. I think that's a really healthy starting point, knowing or being aware that we don't know something. Absolutely, we don't know what we don't know. That's a fact. And the way we find out is by being curious enough and vulnerable enough to experiment, to find things, to challenge ourselves, to get out of our comfort zones, to really see essentially, what is there that we can get better at, essentially. And somebody said really good career advice too. Yes, good stuff. All right, Ivan, I feel you want to say something.
Yeah, of course. You know me. So no, just what I wanted to say in order to do the transition to something that I should say is all of these 4 elements. I mean, the reason why we mention it is not to have like kind of principles about learning, is to nudge you to consider that what Elena mentioned, aspiration, self-awareness, curiosity, vulnerability, these are meta skills. Meta skills are not directly skills that you learn like through presentation, PowerPoints, or through in-class training. It's more about how to help people to prepare with practice how to define an aspiration, to create, in fact, the mental processes in order to have aspiration, in order to develop self-awareness, in order to practice curiosity, and in order to practice vulnerability. So these meta skills are necessary. In fact, what we are saying is are necessary in order to build a self-learning organization. That's the key message. It's not just principles that look awesome like our manifesto. No, it is things that we need to consider in order to develop a self-learning organization. Now, going a little bit further in terms of how people learn, and what happens is that people become successful learners when, first of all, they have the mindset. When we are blocking our mindset, it is because we are holding on to beliefs about ourselves, about our capabilities, and the brain constructs really quickly a good reason to justify why we don't do it. Think about just simple things in life, like I want to go to the gym, Oh, I'm not doing because I'm too tired, because I don't have the time, because the Serbian coach, it might be too harsh on us. So we find the brain constructs reasons that seem super logical, and the other word in fact for these reasons is called procrastination. So if we are not capable of building up the mindset that we are capable, that we can, or that we don't believe that we can learn a new language or we can learn a new skill, we stop trying. So we need to be able to play with the mindset of everybody in order to go and learn. Learning because we must, because we have been scheduled by an HR person to go to a place, is not what is going to crack it in order for people to be motivated to learn. The second thing that is necessary for people to learn is motivation. And it's one of the most misunderstood concepts. When we think about what motivates us, we think about our passion, but motivation isn't the thing that drives us. It is the thing that gives us a purpose. So it is, so you see that the difference is like a little bit something that we have very often discussions with Elena. Why are we doing what we're doing in terms of working together in Besser? Is because we have a purpose, because we have like this big dream of impacting the life of people and so on. It's not because the drive is going to be because it's our passion to teach. No, it is the outcome of our passion will be what we call the purpose. So purpose lights other people up. Purpose on why we are doing things, understanding that why we are doing things is going to move people between the area of I consider it into the action. But remember one thing, motivation is something that is quite volatile. If today we decide to go to the gym, tomorrow, when we have been and we have done too much effort, it becomes a little bit more complicated. So in order to drive motivation in a constant basis, we need to have a method. And this is the third element that is quite important in terms of learning, is to find a way to make it easier for the brain to believe that he's not doing too much effort. When there is the word effort or big change, the brain freezes. The fear factor starts booming, and we start procrastinating, we start not being motivated. So the method is what is going to help us break down the steps of the effort into a smaller task. So instead of having this magnificent 16 hours training about managing people for first time, imagine that you give people the possibility to do micro learnings with micro actions, so that it doesn't look like a big effort, and they have the possibility to generate insights and develop, instead of intensity of the learning, consistency in the learning, so that the more time they have to digest them, the mini spoons of knowledge and practice that you are giving them, the more is going to be embedded in our brain. And by the way, we are going to talk a little bit more about the brain in the next slide. Right, Elena? Oh, that's my favorite slide. Because all of this is the story that I was telling you about mindset, motivation, and method is anchored in how the brain perceives change. If you think about it, in fact, the brain is a difficult animal. 40% of our time, we are doing routines in a daily basis. So most of the storage of if you want, the programming in our brain is things that we have been doing forever. And when we do routines, we don't think about it anymore. We are efficient in terms of the energy that we consume in our brain. And by the way, the organ that consumes most of our energy is not our beautiful muscles, it's our brain. So that means that the brain is always trying to preserve energy. So he doesn't want to do big changes, because that makes them makes the human being do an effort. So think about the last time where you wanted to learn a new skill or get yourself in shape, how difficult it is to do a change in terms of behavior. So if corporate learning is about changing behaviors, that's our big assumption, this is where we get stuck with traditional methods. New behaviors mean is giving the chance to the person to try an action. But in order to do that action, we need to trick the brain into these minimal efforts. So driving small pieces of actions in order to be consistent, because the intensity is what is going to decrease the motivation to learn, and then your brain is shutting down. So imagine that converting this story about, hey, I want to go to the gym, and instead of saying I'm going to subscribe for 1 year and do 1 hour daily, if you decide to break it down and say, what if I start with 10 push-ups in a day or 2 push-ups in a day, and I do it consistently until this action is stored in the area of the brain where there is all of the routines that we do without even thinking. Similarly, skills, meta skills, if people does practice in a consistent basis, they can store it as a routine, and then it becomes less effort. It becomes easier to groom rather than in intensity. I know all about the skill, but I didn't have the capacity for action. The other thing that is important about the brain is that we cannot hold our attention for too long. Our brain needs to, in order to store a new knowledge, it needs to create connections. So when we focus, when we are in the area of focus, we can focus, let's say, for approximately 10 to 12 minutes, according to some of the theories. There are some theories that is a little bit less, but let's assume that we can focus for 10 minutes. So for 10 minutes, we can focus, but if after the focus, we continue to do certain actions in the same focus area, we are not capable of driving connections with other areas of the brain. And what happens is that we don't know how to use the knowledge. Then it becomes stored, and if it is not used, it becomes forgotten. So it is important, in fact, to combine areas of moments of focus where we are really intense into terms of the method of delivery training, and then we have moments of diffusion where we give the capacity to the brain to connect with other areas that have nothing to do with a specific theme. And in order to store it, the more areas are covered in our brain by knowledge, by interacting with different parts of our brain, the more is going to stay and remain in our brain. And that helps, in fact, in the area of helping people generate insights. And what we call intuition is just a way that our brain has found to connect different areas that we didn't know that are correlated. Intuition, guts, or shortcuts. We need to give the possibility for people to develop this without thinking or without making effort, develop this connection. All what we say, this guy has a lot of intuition. In fact, it is that this person has been able to drive and connect different areas of the brain because of the diffuse mode. So all of this needs digestion of the new knowledge is about creating mental processes to define a moment of micro practice, an environment that is risk-free of judgment, because whenever there is judgment, the fear factor jumps in and cannot allow us to do all these neural connections in our brain. Now, you will tell me, but this is tedious, this is a little bit too optimistic, and it's difficult to implement. But let me tell you something that is quite factual. So in our practice at Western, for instance, we measure what is the level of retention of knowledge, and also what is the level of practice. So what we know is that with the methodology that we apply is that we have, after 2 months, we have 60% of people who attended our programs who are still practicing in a consistent manner what they learn. So these micro actions that they need to practice. So Even when the program is finished after 2 months, 60% of them are still practicing. So I'm trying to say is that more than technology is about the method that you use. Technology is just a tool to support the accessibility to many people at the same time, but it's about how you pick and choose different parts, different tools to put them together to say, okay, I'm going to do a blended learning, but a blended learning is not a package. A blended learning is about how are people in my checklist are reacting towards building the mindset, the meta skills that are necessary in order that people want to learn. So it's the most important part of the package should be if the package is answering to how the brain processes new information. And yeah, that's what I wanted to highlight about the how the brain processes information.
And so now we've been kind of talking about on individual level. So let's loop back around to kind of, you know, as organizations, what does it really mean to be a learning organization? I just want to quickly go through these. So, and then we have just a couple of more slides and we're wrapping up. But essentially, learning organization usually possess these kind of characteristics or activities. So one, they have the agile problem solving embedded, and I'll talk about that. They also experiment with new approaches. They learn from their own experiences and past history, and they learn from experiences and best practices of others as well. And then essentially they quickly know how to transfer that knowledge across the organization. So when it comes to agile problem solving, essentially it's just looking at how can you segment business processes in cycles of problem solving patterns into chunks. So how can you break things into chunks that can be essentially, you know, helping you improve on the actual process and doing so quickly. So it's a continuous improvement of kind of what went right, what went wrong, how can we do better? And it's this continuous circle of doing things in such a way, right? And it's essentially just continuously practicing asking ourselves, you know, how do we know that this situation is true? And to help us get to the root cause of something, right? So a lot of times in organizations, when we solve problems, we just put a Band-Aid on a broken leg. We address this this area that's like the most obvious to us and as a challenge, but really the actual root cause of that challenge is right down here. Experimentation is really just continuously improving, creating programs to help your team, you know, flow new ideas, right? Creating a space where people want to experiment, where they're not afraid to fail. So as leaders, it's important for us to essentially, you know, create that safety for our team members to experiment and know that even if they fail, they're not going to be punished for it. Learning from experience, of course, is from our own, you know, are we checking in with ourselves to see, again, what went right? So applying that agile methodology, learning from each experience and taking something positive away from it. And finally, looking at what are others in our industries are doing? How can we use best practices that are in the market to help us be better, essentially? So that's just kind of overview of what does it mean to be a learning organization.
What is quite interesting, Elena, is that so we have moved from the individual and a set of meta skills that they need to build into the organization in order to define something that we call basically what is the culture of the organization, what are the set of role modeling values that are important in the organization, and then it needs to be mapped from the top of the organization up to the lower level. It does not start the other way around in order that to create this type of change. In fact, is almost like a movement that needs to start from the top where they are role modeling behaviors. That means, hey, I'm learning. Hey, this is about my support on vulnerability, or demonstrating or I'm open for challenge, I'm curious, and all these elements needs to be demonstrated from the senior management. The other thing is to allow people to forget certain things that were not working. If you cannot have the best of the past and the best of today. So if you are trying to change and redesign how people learn, So you cannot have saying, oh, I will give the choice for people to have a 2 days training, because maybe this time after 20 years, it will work and I will have a higher percentage of people who are actually using the learning. No, you need to be able to redefine the processes, redefine the tools that you have in place and that do not work, and dare to say, this is out. It's not giving me what I want. And the third point about redefining in the organization is saying, is the role of learning and development really to deliver trainings, or is it to create experiences, moments of interaction with the employees in order to learn better? Because learning is not about just a digital tool. Learning is not about in-class training or having access to different tools. It's about finding the right moments and how to engage with people in order that they believe, they have the belief that they can do better, that they have the belief that that there is a certain level of awareness. And for that, it goes beyond of the current role of most of the learning and development. It needs to be expanded into the psychological aspect of human beings, specifically because in today's world, people are afraid, people are stressed, and that has to do also a lot on what behaviors do we want to implement, and what is the best the best way in order to help them. We don't need to teach only the skills that are necessary for your current job. We need to develop the skills that are necessary to make that the person is engaged, fulfilled in their current job, so that they develop what we call intrinsic motivation, because they have purpose, because they have decided that they are accountable, or the culture is telling them you are part of it. And finally, so that's what is going to define a new type of culture. So this is it. Let's jump this one and just summarize what we have, because we need to have a little bit of time to discuss about engage with the audience.
Absolutely. So, we looked at the sort of challenges where we identified that, even if there are kind of digital learning opportunities that are available, it's simply a tool and it's not enough. And then at the end of the day, it really comes down to the individual specific characteristic behaviors, and specifically creating those processes that are brain friendly, that help us learn. So really creating that mindset, motivation, and a method that works for each individual essentially. And really, it's not just about kind of big chunks of information. How can we take micro learning? How can we create micro actions and habits around these learnings that needs to be continuous, like daily basis, weekly basis, continuous learning that not only individual applies, but also is embedded in our organization so that everybody practices it in a specific way. So really, again, leading by example, showing people essentially, that, best ways to kind of do things, because that is how we influence. The way we influence others is by being the people, the best that we can be. And it's almost like contagious when people are continuously learning, and you're having this environment around, others that are learning, that are progressing, and you're seeing these little micro actions taking place, micro progress, and it motivates everybody to kind of learn. So, and I really do believe that. So if we can just embed these individuals in different teams and help them spread this continuous learning culture, and kind of lead the way and be the champions in this area, that's really where it's at. And that helps with that reinforcement. And essentially, it's just, again, as Ivan mentioned, is targeting those meta skills, helping people learn how to learn that works for them specifically.
Absolutely, Elena. So it's not about how much you have spent in the latest learning management system. It is not about how engaging is the content. There is more than that. In order to be credible with human beings who are working in a day-to-day basis, that are completely overwhelmed, overloaded, it's more about the method that you to approach them, rather than the tool that. And one of the mistakes that we see in a lot of companies is about, they say, oh, I need to invest in this mega super hundreds of $1,000 LMS in order to make people successful. But the thing is that human beings have a natural resistance for change. And so the psychological aspect will play a bigger role in motivating and making people take action, change behavior. So this is it for today. But what we want is, if any of you have any other questions, we would love to keep on the discussion. And by the way, Elena, so what we want is that if you want to have a discussion about where does your learning strategy stands, and so we are offering to the people who are attending this this masterclass the possibility to have a 1-hour consultation. We don't sell. In fact, we are there to help you out, to tell you what are the tools that could, what are the approaches that can help you out to unleash really the potential. What can you do, in fact, with your current tools in order to convert them into a tool that creates motivation, engagement, and actual practice of what they're learning. Sometimes it's a little bit of a tweaking here and there, and we have the right experience, in fact, to tell you more about how we have done this type of changes with other companies. So Fernanda, learning from each other will also promote inclusivity within teams, which is something that helps people to develop also intrinsic motivation. If you feel part of a gang with the same purpose, gosh, you are really energized. Where should learning strategy begin? So that's a super good question. So the learning strategy it does not start by having a needs of roles, but it's more about understanding what are the needs in order that the culture of a company moves from what it is today to what it is in the future. So before you go into the specific skills, what are the meta skills that people need in order to be self-sustainable in terms of the learning? That's where what are the set of values that needs to be where people needs to be engaged and demonstrated in order that they develop this self-awareness, curiosity, and motivation mindset that is necessary before they go to the